I am not a scientist. I am a philosopher. But I was married to a scientist. And his name is different from mine, and he's no longer here, so I think I can speak freely. Who, in many ways, had very high ethical principles as far as a work ethic, as far as not falsifying data. But something that happens to vivisectors, and Jeremy mentioned it, makes it less likely for them to be able to make correct ethical decisions in these matters. And that's what I'm interested in. I had a sabbatical about 7 years ago in which I did research on why empathy is blocked. You know, what mechanisms are used or happen to block empathy. But I'd like to start out by saying some things that I learned from living with a scientist that have to do with this induced ethical blindness. One thing I remember was my former husband said that he could never work on cats or dogs. At that time he was working on mice. And I wondered, you know, who but a scientist knows better the similarity of those animals and their similarity in capacity to suffer. So why would that make a difference? It has to be totally personal as far as our relationship with the animal. It has nothing to do with the capacities of the animal. So I once was part of a panel at a local high school and on animal rights, and the other member was a vivisector from another college, another university in our system. And he started his presentation by saying, a lot of people think that I hate animals because of what I do. Well, they should talk to my dogs. And I thought the same thing is happening there. There's an irrational preference for one species that's not really different from another, that is taken to be a tool or a material for experimentation. I also remember my former husband coming home one day and saying that a prospective graduate student had come in to spend the day in the lab, and at the end of the day said, I don't think I can do this because of the animals. And my husband said it, ordinarily he wouldn't share this kind of thing. So I think it was bothering him. And he said, I said to him, think about it hard, because it will mean your career. And this is the most chilling story of all, I think. There was, at this particular lab, I'm not going to name it, but you do in medicine, a very bright postdoc who was postdocing with a colleague of my husband, my then husband, who was admired for his intelligence, but thought to be, you know, kind of a crazy guy, wild and crazy guy. And one day, he threw a live mouse out of an upper story window, and the people who told me about this later, I mean, they kept coming back to it over the weeks afterwards. You could tell they were uncomfortable with this. There was something wrong with it. But to my knowledge, no one ever reported it. And as far as I know, that man, known as Crazy Jim, has moved on to a successful and prestigious placement, I assume. Now, at the time, I remember thinking, if that had been a dog, he would be either jailed or sent in for mental illness evaluation. So why is it that it was okay? Not okay, everybody was a little nervous about it, but why did this get by? How did this happen? And when I did my sabbatical, all of this was leading up to, you know, what is it in us that blocks empathy or compassion? Because compassion is really a better word. And I think for compassion to operate, there has to be three things, and I'm drawing this from as far back as Aristotle, and as currently as Martha as well. That, first of all, the suffering of the being that we're either going to or not going to be compassionate towards has to be perceived as serious, not trivial. Now, how does that get blocked with animals? I think by this detached language is one way. You know, we're not talking about thirst, we're not talking about dehydration, we're talking about regulation of water intake. You know? and free access to water on weekends. Secondly, we have to, if we're going to be compassionate or feel compassion towards another being, we don't want to feel that they are responsible for their pain, that it's their fault. We have to feel that they're innocent. This one's a harder one to get around. I think we get around it in other cases of animal suffering. For example, deer that run across the road and get hit by cars are called stupid for being on that road. What's wrong with them? Now that's harder to do with lab animals who actually have been captured and brought to labs. But I think a similar thing is accomplished by degrading their status and making them less worthy. And that leads to the third condition, which is basic to the other two, that there has to be enough similarity between us and the other being that we can even imagine ourselves in that suffering. So it's easier to deny that with, laboratory mice. After all, mice are tiny, they're scurry around, they have beady little eyes, and they are considered dirty. So it's easy, it's kind of easy to treat them. Rats are even more, right, because they carry the plague. When you get to primates, it's very hard to deny the similarity. Okay, so how I think the mechanism that comes into play here is to, and you'll see that in funny greeting cards, monkeys dressed up to look stupid in human clothes. And I think that what's going on there is making them appear to be a degradation from the human standard. They're failed attempts at being us. Okay, and therefore we don't have to empathize with them. Now this is, in this university, particularly puzzling, since the fame of the Primate Center and the Harlow Lab came from Harry Harlow, who showed that there is so much similarity that you can predict what's going to happen in human babies from what happens in monkey babies. Now, I am in the process of reading a draft of a book written by Rick Bogle in which he explores this puzzling dilemma more fully, so I haven't finished it yet. But what do we do with that? What do we do with the fact that in order to make the experiments valid, there has to be enough similarity such that they can be made mad. They can be made psychotic by maternal deprivation, those things. And yet, what would be understood by everyone as immoral if done to a human is okay to do. So I guess I want to just end this by saying by bringing up one of the slogans of this project, which is, how like us do they have to be before we stop?